After all this waiting, it's finally here. CGC Trading Cards has finally launched their population report after promising it to us more or less since they started grading. It was always something that was said to be coming soon, up next, and we finally got it. And while one of the reasons that I did want the pop report was just to be able to see the overall population for a lot of the cards that I do grade, the main thing that I really wanted to be able to use the population report for was to see just how tough CGC has been on grading cards. I think a couple months ago I was on a podcast with Dan from Catch 'em All Collectibles, and that was something that we had discussed was when the CGC population report comes out, what percentage of cards graded do you think they'll have as 9.5? We came to the same conclusion that there would probably be less CGC 9.5s graded than PSA 10s, and I mean, obviously a much smaller percentage that actually even cross over the 10s. And if you've watched any of my videos over the past year and a half now of grading with them, you can kind of see how tough they are to grade with. So now that it's finally here, we actually have some solid numbers to work with. The information I'm going to reference comes from P2 Collector on Instagram. One of the cool metrics he did have was how many cards PSA has graded in the same lifespan that CGC has been around for. And this was kind of shocking to me to see that CGC's only graded 29% fewer cards in the same time span as PSA. And for reference, PSA has kind of had their market share for a much longer period of time. They have the facilities. So for CGC to do within 30% of a company like PSA, I think that's really astounding for them. But the really important metric that he did showcase was the actual grade breakdown percentage for CGC graded cards. The most jaw-dropping thing to me is looking at the percentage of 9.5 CGC gives out. We can see out of the 1.3 million cards CGC's graded, around 204,000 of them came back 9.5. That is overall 15.2% of the total amount graded. And while that seems like a pretty healthy portion, if you consider a 9.5 a gem mint card as the label does say, we can take a look at the PSA pop report numbers that P2 Fan has discussed on E4. And it's kind of like shocking here. You see that PSA 10, their gem mint standard, around 37% of all PSA graded Pokemon cards come back gem mint 10. And we can even take it a step further and look at PSA 9 versus CGC 9 populations. Even in this case, we see that a PSA 9 population is around 37% of the total Pokemon cards graded by them, while with CGC it's around 36%. There are probably a couple factors at play here. Part of it just has to be how long PSA's been grading cards for. For a long time, it just wasn't worth submitting anything that would actually grade beneath a 9. That's been the case for a while. Just most cards don't do well unless you get a 10 in the past. But it very much wasn't the case over the past year when CGC came onto the market. People were essentially grading almost everything. You've seen talk about it for months now about what is a junk slab. Is a junk slab going to crush the market? Stuff like that. There's a lot of people grading stuff that is of kind of lower tier. Me especially, like I'm part of that whole thing is grading stuff that isn't, mint plus condition. So that definitely does, I think, affect the total metric for CGC. Even taking that into account, I think it's still kind of shocking to see that CGC 9.5s are still less than half the percentage of PSA 10s. And another thing to consider is that if you grade with both companies, you're pretty much getting CGC 9s at a rate closest to PSA 10, especially compared to any other grade given out by CGC. And now I wanted to look at how many CGC 10s there actually are out there. I've always felt that they were very, very difficult to get, and it seems that, it wasn't just me that was having issues with them. We can see here that out of the over 1.3 million cards CGC has graded, only 12,000 of them have come back a CGC 10 pristine. In terms of percentages, this is less than 1%. It's 0.93% have come back this grade. And if we just look at it on a bar chart, per se, you could see how small of an actual amount that is coming back at this level. And to get an even smaller number, we can look at how many CGC perfect 10s are out there. As I said, of the 1.3 million cards they've graded so far, only 1,500 have come back perfect 10. So you're looking at 0.12% of the total population of cards graded coming back at this high of a grade. I mentioned earlier that for a long time it wasn't worth sending anything not mint plus to PSA for grading, and that might be one of the main reasons that the grading standard or scale is kind of skewed to make it seem like there's more maybe PSA 10s, PSA 9s. While I do think you can make the argument for that, I think another thing that you could also just look at is a newer card that was released within the past 1 or 2 years. The best card to use for a scale here is going to be the Charizard V Champions Path promotional card. This card is given out in every Champions Path Elite Trainer box, and for both company, it's their most graded card, so I think that creates a pretty nice sample size to compare from. We can see with PSA, they've graded over 36,500 copies of this card already, and if you've never used a PSA population report before, the number all the way at the right end is the total amount graded. The number right next to it, the 20,390 copies, that is for the amount of 10s, and the number next to it is the amount of 9s. So they've graded 13,173 9s at the moment of this video. We can now compare that to the CGC population report for these cards. Overall, CGC's graded over 16,900 copies of this card, with 3,600 coming back 9.5 and 8,700 coming back 9. Only 87 of the total amount graded have come back 10s. So I then wanted to take this information from the two companies and plot them on the graphs to have a better frame of reference. The first thing I did was take the CGC graded copies for the Charizard V, and I only decided to plot for the top 4 highest grades. And we can see here that for CGC, a majority of their copies came back a CGC 9, and in terms of percentages, around 51% come back CGC 9, 21% come back 9.5, and less than 1%. We have 0.5% of the copies come back as CGC 10. And if we did the same type of graph for the PSA graded copies, we can see that it's skewed in a much different way. It seems that a majority of the copies coming back are going to be PSA 10 condition. We see that around 55% of all copies are coming back PSA 10, 36% as 9s, and then once you get past 9, it drops off a cliff. And the last thing I want to do is just to show the CGC and PSA graded percentages next to each other. This really just helps us see that the PSA 10 and CGC 9 are coming back at around the same rate from both companies. At both these grades, they're hovering right around that 55% rate for copies graded. Now, what can we do with that information? I'm not really sure. I think there's always just been this long discussion about how tough CGC is, especially compared to PSA and BGS. I think one big takeaway that we can have from all this is just to show how rare a CGC 10 really is. And I really don't think a PSA 10 and a CGC 10 should be that close in price given everything that we've seen so far. Especially since 9s in both those companies kind of go for a similar amount of money. There's really no reason for the 10 at such a higher rarity to be going for the same price. I think it's also important to just remember how long PSA has been grading cards for, and that they have a pretty firm grasp on a majority of the market, all while I think people just prefer to have their cards labeled as a 10. And I think if you're going to take away anything from this video, it's just maybe consider the CGC 10. If you really are looking for a pristine copy of a card that you really want, I think it's fair to consider getting the CGC copy, especially if they're the same price as the PSA. That's where I'm going to call the video. I just wanted to go over CGC finally adding a pop report and how we can use it to answer that old debate on how hard is it to get a high grade in CGC. And I think this video does kind of illustrate my points really well, but if not, if you have any thoughts of your own, feel free to let me know. Thanks for watching as always, and have a nice one.